Welcome to the Practical Futurist podcast, a bi-weekly show all about the near-term future with practical advice from a range of global experts to help you stay ahead of the curve. Every episode answers the question, what's the future of? With voices and opinions that need to be heard. Your host is international keynote speaker and practical futurist Andrew Gribble.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of a special episode of the Practical Futurist podcast. Today we have a returning guest, Dr Lynn Gribble, who is one of Australia's founding coaches, an accidental academic and an award-winning author and university lecturer. Lynn calls herself a pragmatic futurist coach. She also helps people to future-proof their careers in an ever-evolving workplace. Lynn is coming to us live today from Sydney, Australia. Now, it's important to note, as we record Saturday, 21st of March, 2020, it's fair to say that on both sides of the world, we are living in completely uncharted waters. Here in the UK, pubs, clubs, churches, museums, cinemas, theatres and schools are all now closed. The government has just offered to pay up to 80% of workers' wages while these companies are shut down. And everyone I know is working from home, and last night the streets here in London were deserted. I've never lived through a world war, but many are saying this is a similar time. Hi, Lynn. First of all, how are you and how are your family? Are they safe and healthy?
Yep, we're all safe and healthy. I moved to working from home from Tuesday of this last week. We went live with everything we were doing in a virtual world from Monday. So we did a simultaneous from Monday. And so we're just practicing really good processes of, keeping things clean, making sure that everything that comes in our house is clean and kept clean. And so it's all good for us.
Now, just for some context, those that didn't hear you last year on Season 1, you're a university lecturer. Just explain where you lecture and what you lecture in.
So I work at the University of New South Wales, which is one of the top 8 universities, or part of the group of 8 universities in Australia. And we have the number 1 business school in Australia, and I'm part of that school. And so we have a number of international students as well as local students. We've got about 57,000 students when our campus is full. So this week we've made the decision to put all our lectures and everything online and work with our students in a virtual space, which is very exciting because I've been teaching online for 16 years and I think that this may actually be the future.
Well, I never wanted to have a case study about the future of work, and like you, I've been working remotely for many years. I'm a nomad. I just need Wi-Fi, coffee and a flat surface. What's interesting, a lot of my colleagues that have been working at home for the first time, I actually helped one of them lug a monitor up the stairs the other day. They're finding it really, really arresting to work, first of all, on their own, so their mental health issues, but also getting work done. What tips could you give someone who has all of a sudden been told, go home and work from home? What are some things they can be doing to ease into this? Because it is a very, very uncomfortable environment, I'm sure.
A lot of people use their workplace as a pseudo-family space. And I think that that's the first thing that we need to acknowledge, that we spend a large amount of time at work, and work is a very, for many people, social environment. My PhD looked at what happens to people when they get retrenched. And so I've heard all the stories of isolation and not being in the office, etc. So the first thing that people need to do is recognize that just because you're used to having a large monitor or traveling somewhere for work doesn't mean that that's what you need to do for the rest of your life. The second thing around this is that people often focus on what's different rather than focusing on what's the same. So you need to keep a routine. Routine is absolutely key. If you think about how different, for many people, if they work, say, Monday to Friday, they will often find that on the weekend they're not eating at the same time, they're not exercising at the same time, they're not getting up at the same time. So what going to the office provides is structure. And so if you can make a structure about being at home and try to create the similar structure you would have as if you were going to work. So if you normally get up at 7, you should normally get up at 7. If you normally get up at 6 and go to the gym, maybe your gym workout is now at home. There are so many great apps to be working out at home. So, and you can work out at home, rain, hail, shine, whether it's 40 degrees in Australia or -4 degrees in London. So the thing is, create a routine that you can replicate anywhere. And this is one of the foundational things of being able to be flexible and work from anywhere.
So one friend of mine was talking about having to have FaceTime. So a lot of these things are on voice call, and apparently their boss has said, well, once a week we have to have quote FaceTime. And they were talking about how they had then had to go and put makeup on and do their hair and everything else. Is this the right thing? Should we force people to be present? I was actually saying to them that probably after, if this goes on for months, we won't care what we look like in 6 months. We will just go on with our hair and no makeup or whatever, just to be present. But is it important to see other colleagues? I mean, I'm seeing lots of photos on social media of all these, like the Brady Bunch squares, all these people, waving and happy. Let's fast forward 6 months. How will it look in 6 months when this is the new normal?
So actually connecting, and however connecting works for you, if that's about seeing somebody, if it's about texting somebody, so if it's about being present, I always remember when my daughter was quite young, that I'd often ring a friend on Friday about 5:30, and they also had small kids, and we would have a phone conversation and share a glass of wine. And so for me, the whole idea of virtually meeting up, I mean, look, here we are, you and I, halfway around the world, and this conversation wouldn't be that different if we were in the same room. The difference would be that we could see each other. If we really wanted to see each other now, we could turn on a medium that would allow that. But I don't feel that it's so necessary. And to your point about people feeling that, do I put my makeup on or not? Do I get dressed or not? The ritual of getting dressed into business clothes, there's lots of studies that talk about when people dress casually, they act casually. So there is a really good rigor about getting up in the morning and getting dressed for work, particularly if that's what you've always done. And then over time, being careful that you don't start to become too casual and treat your work colleagues like you might treat your friends, because there's a different set of engagement. So it's not about whether you wear makeup or don't wear makeup, wear a suit or don't wear a suit. You should be dressed in a way that makes you feel professional. So a lot of people, where this falls down for them, is that they would prefer to wear their gym gear 24/7. And this is often why we hear new mums say, oh, I just don't get dressed up anymore. I just don't feel like myself anymore. And I say, well, are you dressing the way you were when you went to school, when you went to work? And they say, well, I don't need to. And I go, you might be surprised how that affects your psyche. So there is a real thing about, get up, turn up, show up, and do this in a way that makes you feel professional, because clothes are often our armor to the world.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people, whether they're working from home or freelancing, this is a time of uncertainty. And you said your PhD sort of covered this, sort of thriving in uncertainty. Let's assume, as the government is trying to tell us, that this could last for months, not weeks. How do we thrive in uncertain times like now?
The thing that happens with the human mind is that when we are uncertain, we try and solve that problem. We are problem-solving beings. And so with uncertainty, what people try and do is imagine how to create certainty. From the time we're very little, you have to think about, what's the first thing they tell you with a young baby? Get it in a routine so it knows what's coming next, so it understands the system, the pattern, the process. So when we break those patterns and processes, people become very uncertain and they seek ways to create certainty. I had predicted that we would move to a work from home model, and I had predicted we would do that around mid to late February. So I'm a little bit out. I was a little bit ahead of myself. But nonetheless, what we do know is that for now, most people who've got a job are doing that from an isolation perspective, whether that's at home or social distancing or whatever. So that is a known, and that's not going to change for the foreseeable future. Now, whether that's a couple of months, many months, or more than many months, but it certainly isn't going to change in the next week or two. So you can know for certain that how you're setting up to work, you should set it up so that you're comfortable to do this for an ongoing period. And if that's a couple of months or more than a couple of months, that should be okay. Don't make do, instead of make it what you want it to be for that. Focus on all the things that you know. So if you've got a job, you know what that job looks like. How you go about it might change, but the job itself hasn't changed. Your family hasn't changed. Your living situations haven't changed. So focusing on what you know rather than what you don't know, and keep your mind coming back to, I know this. When somebody says, what about this? Don't dwell in the I don't know, because as soon as you go there, your mind will try and solve it. So focus on, make a list of all the things you do know. And when somebody says, what about this? Say, actually, what I do know is this, and keep talking about what you know and focus on what you know and what you can anchor to.
So for those out there that manage teams and are used to majority of them having the team in the office and being able to see them and talk to them and have team meetings, how can managers really get the best out of their teams when they're dispersed like they are now?
You know, I've been working with and in a virtual team for, as I said, over 16 years. And I think it's about making sure that your communications are frequent and actually thinking about where they are and where you are. So sharing starting an email that is at the beginning of each day, hi all, these are the things that are on my desk and what I'm thinking about. Hit reply all and tell us where you are. If you don't have a more sophisticated system than that, that's a good start. Do a check-in at least once a week by voice, whether that's a group Skype chat or a group Zoom chat or whatever you're going to use. But find ways that also people acknowledge what else is happening for them. So just as if you're at work, you would say, so if you and I worked in the same office, we would talk about, our families, what we did on the weekend, etc. So make the space to do that, even when you're not all seated together or seeing each other physically. So, hope everybody had a great weekend. Don't know about you. This is what I got up to. Somebody might come back and say, no, actually mine wasn't so good, but that's a real insight to where their mental health is. And often that's the launch point for you to be able to say, how can I help? What can I do to support?
Yeah, mental health, I think, is going to be a real issue for a lot of people because they're now in this new environment. Again, friends of mine saying, they haven't been used to working on their own, isolated for a whole day, and it can be quite challenging. As a group of friends, we're in touch with each other, we're seeing each other as much as we can with social isolation to keep our spirits up. But for those that are now finding if they haven't got family at home, how can they stay mentally healthy and resilient during this time? What are some tips you can give people out there listening to the podcast right now?
Well, there's definitely the point of physical exercise. So whether that's subscribing to some sort of exercise program, normally I would exercise I do a 28-minute program. I would do that probably every other day. But during this time, I'm definitely making the effort to do it every day because that physical movement, making sure that I walk out onto my balcony and breathe some fresh air because it's not about leaving where I currently am. And also, doing things like FaceTime, sending somebody something that's funny that makes them engage. Think about how you can use social media to connect, to share your day. Take some photos, share some photos, set up a shared drive, a Dropbox where you're putting those in, or a medium where you can say, look, this is what I did. So somebody today said to me, oh, wow, I want to show you the picture I bought. Now, because they don't live in Sydney, they sent me a picture. And I said, oh, that's lovely. And we had a bit of a chat about that. And then I said, oh, and I put up some of my photos. And so I, showed them which photos, but I didn't send them the photos from my camera reel. I actually took photos of them on my wall. So it made it real where they were. So you've got to think about if the person was with you, you would physically take them and show them. If they're not physically with you, how can you do that? Is it by FaceTime? Is it by sending them a picture in situ of what you're talking about?
Yeah, what you're saying is we have to try a bit harder to have that social element. And I know people I've worked for in the past are frowned upon if you talk about what you've done on the weekend, but that's a part of interacting. And I think if you take that away physically, managers, companies have to realize there has to be some time set aside to be human. And I think at the moment, it's fair to say, I said in my intro, we've never lived through a world war. We don't know what it's like to be rationed. We don't know what it likes to be curfewed. And so I think maybe for a lot of companies out there, they need to sort of step back and relax. And even for managers, I mean, everyone has a manager unless you're the CEO. So they have to realize that their manager needs to allow them to be a human. Maybe one positive thing out of this time going forward is that we learn again how to be humans and care for each other.
That's definitely a positive. And the other positive that's likely to come is we'll stop measuring hours and start measuring output. And that's really the future of work. So we need to measure what you get done as opposed to how long it takes you to do it. And we also need to recognize that we need to become a world of back to the, yep, I can do that, I'm prepared to do that, rather than, no, I'm not prepared to do that. So if I think about the people who are going to thrive and be successful, instead of saying, oh, I don't like that, or I'm not going to do that, or I'm leaving because, that doesn't suit me, we're going to create a new world again, which is much more service focused about, sure, I'll give that a try. If you're asking me, let me at least explore it. Let's have a proper conversation if it works or doesn't work. So we're changing the way people are changing. And I think that is really exciting when we get past the fear of it. So all of a sudden, companies that were not ready to go digital at all have had to make do and do the best. And it's also creating a kinder, more considerate world about, rather than, oh, that's not perfect. People are going, well, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So it's actually lowering that expectation too, that it doesn't have to be perfect to go with it. The digital world won't be perfect, but what we can do is we can give it a red hot crack. And as you said, this is times that we've not seen. The streets are deserted. You're in a greater lockdown than we are at the moment in Australia. But already what we're seeing is that when we move aside from the frenzy, people are actually treating each other with a lot of kindness. So I think this has got great potential for humanity. We just need to get through the fear and panic first.
So as an expat Aussie, I look at the Australian papers every day, probably read them before you've seen them. I saw yesterday a picture of thousands of people on Bondi Beach. Today, the beaches have been closed because the government has said, you're not listening to us. We need to provide a bit more leadership. Where can governments and companies provide that leadership? And at what point do you think the herd mentality people will not listen? I mean, there's round the world panic buying. Ironically, there's the story about loo rolls in your country and my country. But in the beginning of the week, I was in a computer shop and the monitor aisle was completely empty or ransacked of monitors because people are now being told to go home and they need a monitor. Back to my question, what can governments and companies do to provide that leadership? And do we just follow them blindly, or can we push back? I mean, what do we need to do as humans to comply during this sort of uncertain time?
We need to be very specific with people what social isolation looks like. I saw today somebody say, oh, get out and walk. And somebody else came back and said to that person, I'm in self-isolation. I'm not allowed to do that or I'll get fined X amount of dollars. And this person said, oh, really? And I went, wow. So people don't understand what that means. Because my daughter is allergic to peanuts, we're very good at not cross-contaminating anything. So we've got a real drill that happens when you arrive at our house, like take your shoes off, use the pump pack of hand sanitizer, et cetera, et cetera. We know how to do that because we're really good at not cross-contaminating for food. And so we were just able to take that lesson and apply it. So I was really astounded when I saw everybody sitting on Bondi Beach yesterday and I went, they don't understand because they've read the in confined spaces or they've heard the in confined spaces because people are selective in how they can process information, particularly when they're stressed and taking on a lot of information. So I think that giving really specific examples helps. In answer to the second part of the question about when should we push back versus when should we listen, we always have a rule in our family of that if the herd says do this and we think that we should do more, then we do more. So we don't necessarily wait to be told. We'll always proactively think about what our own decisions are. And that served us very, very well. So my brother was able to get out of the bushfires ahead of time because he didn't listen to the crowd that said, oh, this will pass, just wait. He said, everything tells me this isn't going to pass. We're leaving, we're evacuating. And literally they got out with them closing roads behind him. And he said, thank goodness I didn't listen. I said, oh, that's one of the things we're very good at doing is assessing the situation. So I think you have to assess the situation. So just like at the beginning of this term, when I started teaching, I thought to myself, if this was to get worse, how would I be ready? And so I'd already thought through some contingencies. So as I was watching the students feeling uncomfortable on Sunday, I just made a call on Monday by talking to, the people who run my school and run our education team and said, we're going to go online from today. Is that okay? And they said, yes, it's likely to happen this week anyway. So if you're ready to go, roll. So we were able to roll with a less than 2-hour notice period because I'd already done the thinking about it. So I think it's not about thinking about the uncertainty, but actually having contingencies, then putting them to bed and saying, and if that happens, I know exactly how to enact it. Just make it easy for yourself, because otherwise it's about cognitive load. And that's really, really tricky. And that's what's really exhausting people at the moment. They can't decipher the information.
One final topic, tools. You're an educator, you do a lot of things online. What tools should people be considering to get work done, to stay in touch, to find out what's going on? Are they your sort of favourite go-to grab bag of tools that you'd like to recommend?
So I'm using such a variety of tools, and I constantly, as you know, Andrew, look for different things, and you and I talk frequently about different great tools that you can use. If you've got a computer that has access to QuickTime, access to PowerPoint, and you've got email, and you've got internet access, and you've got a phone that you can do some sort of video calling with, then you can pretty much do anything. But of course, I love to use things like Skype. I'm using another tool called Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, which allows me to have real-time classrooms. I'm using things like Zeetings and Socrative so that I can ask questions out to large groups of people in real time, and they can tell me in real time, and I can collate that and then feed it back to them and say, you're telling me this. Let me give you information that you're looking for. Let me help by answering their concerns and their questions. So we have to create a repository that allows us to capture what people are worried about. And then we have to answer that in a way that doesn't escalate the worry, but actually gives them practical ways to do something different. So at the moment, my advice to everybody is that if your job is in difficulty and there is something that you could do that would earn you any money, even though it's not what you would normally do, go give it a go, because you might find that interaction and even that small amount of money will be better for your self-esteem than sitting at home worrying.
Final question. What 3 things can our listeners do today to help with their anxiety around the current environment?
Focus on what you know. Make sure you do something physical every day, even if that is some sort of meditative practice or run around the room, and do some star jumps. And I don't know if you can touch your toes, but touch your toes. So anything that's like that. And then think about something that makes you happy, whether that's listening to music. So I'm a great, concert goer, and there's a lot of stuff online at the moment. So you can go to a virtual musical, you can go to a virtual museum, you can do all of that. And I'm going to add a 4th one, which is reach out and connect to people. Make a phone call, even if it's for 10 minutes a day, and have a real-time conversation, just like you'd have if you'd gone to buy your coffee. And keep the rituals. Sorry, that's 5. But if you do those 5 things, you're going to find that this time will be far easier.
Good point. I can't remember the last time my phone actually rang with a human being on the end of it. So it would be nice to get a real phone call. Look, thanks so much for your time, Lynn. How can people find out more about you?
They can contact me through our website, talkingtrends.com.au. And of course, the regular channels through that website will get to me as well.
Lynn, thanks so much for your time. Please stay safe and stay healthy.
You too, Andrew. Lovely to chat.
Thank you for listening to the Practical Futurist podcast. You can find all of our previous shows at futurist.london. And if you like what you've heard on the show, please consider subscribing via your favourite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can find out more about Andrew and how he helps corporates navigate a disruptive digital world with keynote speeches and C-suite workshops at futurist.london. Until next time, this has been the Practical Futurist podcast.